Hi, I'm Jamie Boss. Welcome to our video. Now in this video, what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you detailed step-by-step instructions how you can simply set up your acoustic steel string guitar. There's going to be a little bit different than setting up an electric guitar, and certainly going to be different than setting up a nylon string classical guitar. So this video is just for steel string acoustic guitars. Now in the video, I'm also going to give you a lot of information in a lot of different areas. That's going to enable you to, one, diagnose some of your own problems with a guitar. Two, they're going to dispel a lot of common beliefs you may or may not have had about a guitar, because there are a lot of false ideas out there about guitars. And three, you're going to be able to talk to your luthier, the person that repairs your guitar, a little bit more intelligently, down to his level, and you're actually going to know when he's on the right track to finding out what the problem of your guitar is. So you might not use all this information. You certainly won't have the tools to do everything I'm going to talk about and show you, but you will have the knowledge and the practical idea behind everything that the luthier is going to do to your guitar. Anytime you go to set up an acoustic guitar, there's a whole bunch of properties that we're going to go over that an experienced guitar technician or luthier or whatever you want to call them is going to be looking at in order to diagnose problems and in order to set up the guitar properly in the first place. And for the guitar, this is an old O-style model. It's a Recording King, a wonderful little guitar. And this is a brand new one, which we're going to be going through and checking the setup, because even on a brand new guitar, we can end up having problems. So we're going to start with all the factors that I'm going to look at in terms of playability. And one of the first things I'm going to be looking at is scale. The scale of the guitar really reflects on the playability of the guitar. Now, let me find my ruler. Oh, here it is. This guitar here is 25 inches and 3/8 total. And the scale is from the leading edge of the saddle to the leading edge of the nut. And generally when they set up the guitar, when they build it, they add in an additional 1/8 of an inch. So the true scale would be measuring it from the leading edge of the nut to the center of the 12th fret. That's half the scale, double that, and that is the true scale. And the true scale, or the scale of the guitar, is set up by whatever specifications the guitar builder used to make the guitar. As the scale gets longer on a guitar, the distance between the frets also becomes longer. As the scale gets shorter, the distance between the frets also becomes shorter. Conversely, as the scale gets longer, when you tighten up the tuners, the tension on the string becomes greater. So if I had let's say a gypsy jazz guitar that was 26 5/8 inch scale, which is a long scale, or let's say I had a really, really old Kalamazoo that had a long scale. As I'm tuning it with a guitar tuner set on 440 Hertz, by the time I set the E string, the 6th string, to perfect E on the guitar tuner, the tension on that string would be far greater than the tension on this little guitar. So the longer the scale, when I tune it up, the more tension is going to be on the strings. So in terms of playability, that counts for a lot. It's going to be harder to press down. And because by virtue of the fact that it's a longer scale, the distance between the frets now becomes greater. So it's going to be harder for me to make that reach on certain chords or certain things that I'm trying to play. So the scale has everything to do with how hard it is to push the string down and how much you reach, or how the effort that you put into reaching different chord positions when you play it. Now, there is a rule of thumb on picking out a guitar, and that's called the 9-inch rule of thumb. Your typical Fender scale of 25.5 inches, or which would be extremely close to a classical guitar, which would be 650 millimeters, those two typical scales are considered a full-size guitar, or a normal scale. And if you can take a ruler and spread your hand like this, not so you're straining, but just comfortably, and you measure from fingertip to thumb tip. If you can measure 9 inches or more, you can comfortably play a 25.5 inch scale guitar or a 650 millimeter classical guitar. If you're considerably less than 9 inches, in order for you to be good at playing that guitar or comfortable at playing that guitar, you'd need a shorter scale. In the case of the classical guitar, you can get a 630 millimeter scale. On steel string guitars, there's all different types of scales. So just the scale alone has to do with string tension and your ability to reach for those particular chords. We also get into neck width, okay, how wide the neck is across the fretboard, especially at the first fret. Now typically, steel string guitars, dreadnought guitars, they have a very thin neck. And the thinner the neck, the easier it is to play with a pick, the easier it is to change chord positions, but the harder it is to do fingerstyle playing. As you get more and more complicated fingerstyle, you would probably want to have the neck a little bit wider. The widest neck you're going to run into is going to be a classical guitar, and that's going to be about 2 inches. So we can have steel string guitars from very narrow to almost as wide as a classical guitar, and then we have a classical guitar that is roughly 2 inches most of the time. So your ability to play fingerstyle has everything to do with how wide the fretboard is, especially around the first fret. But we also have the thickness of the neck, because as we grow older, it gets very difficult to deal with a thicker neck, okay? As your hand gets older, a thinner neck is going to feel a lot more comfortable. Now, I'm no spring chicken, I'm 63, so I prefer a thinner neck. But the width and the thickness of the neck have everything to do with how good your hand is going to feel playing the guitar, and it's going to have everything to do with your ability to either finger pick or to play with a pick very fast, like in bluegrass music. The other thing that we have to deal with on a guitar in terms of playability is string height. Most people look at the 12th fret and we say, okay, the 12th fret it's so high between the top of the 12th fret and the bottom of the string. And that's what they use to judge whether or not the string height is set up properly. And that's not the whole case. That's only a small portion of the story. What we do in our shop is we take and I guess the easiest way to tell you is just a Martin light pick, which is 0.46 millimeters. It's less than a half a millimeter. And we take the 0.46 millimeter pick, and just sitting here, I put it between the 6th string and the 1st fret. And if it doesn't stay there, if it drops out, it is too high at the 1st fret. This first adjustment is very critical in enjoying playing your guitar. If it's too high there, I don't care what it is down here, since we play in the first position or in this area most of the time, you're really going to be working your hand hard if the strings are too high here. So what we do in our shop is we take the light pick, we put it in there on all the strings, and we make sure it just touches, or I put it in, it should be able to stay there. And if it falls out like that, then we have to adjust the height. And we do that first before we adjust it at the 12th fret. So how do you adjust the height? Well, typically the only way to adjust the height is at the slot. And we have to loosen the string, take it off, file down the slot a little bit, put the string back on, and recheck it. And we have to do that for all of the strings that the string height at the first fret is too high. So it might take us a half an hour just to get them perfect. In order to adjust the slot, we're going to be taking special fret files like this, okay? And the fret files are designed to fit into one slot at a time. So the file for the 6th string is this one here. I take the string off and I start on a little bit of an angle. I don't want to be flat. You never want the slot to be perfectly flat like this. It'll probably end up buzzing. So I raise it up a little bit, and as I just bring it in and I go in one direction and I tilt it down like this, I take a little bit off, I put the string back on and grab my pick and I check it for the right height, and I keep doing that until I get it right. Plastic nuts tend to file very quickly, so you only want to do it a little bit at a time and then check it. If it's bone, it's not going to file down as quickly. If you go past it, what we do is we just simply take some sandpaper, we take a piece of bone, we make some bone sawdust, we fill up the slot, harden it with crazy glue, and then recut the slot again. But generally, that's something a luthier would do in a shop. So if you're going to do that adjustment yourself, you just want to go a little bit at a time. Don't go crazy, because if you get it down too far, then we're going to have a problem. Once we get that set up, and I guess it's important for you to realize that on most fretboards, there is a radius across the top of the fretboard. Now this radius is there to make it easier to play the guitar when I have my hand around it. Classical guitars, for instance, are flat. There's no radius on it. Steel string guitars, there is a radius. The radius makes it easier for us to either bar a chord or to play it, and it just works with a natural function of our hands. So there is a radius on the fretboard in this direction here, and they're all different kinds of radiuses. You want the radius of all of these strings at the nut to match the radius of the fretboard. So that's something that you just want to be very aware of as you're filing down the frets. When we come down to the 12th fret, we need to measure against the top of the fret and the bottom of the string. Now to do that, we have a little gauge that I use, and this little gauge allows me to put it on here, and I can just take my gauge, I rest it on the 12th fret, I can look underneath the string and I can see what the distance is between the top of the 12th fret and the bottom of the string. Now in this case, the distance is about 120 thousandths, okay? At 120 thousandths, that's a little bit too high. It could be lower, but I wouldn't begin to lower that until I adjusted it at the nut. I could bring that down to 100 thousandths or even 90 thousandths as long as the fretboard truss rod was adjusted properly. Now we'll get into that a little bit later on. But the 90 thousandths here, less than a half a millimeter here, is going to make all the difference in the world of this guitar playing easily or wearing your hand out very quickly. And how would we adjust the height at the 12th fret? We loosen all the strings, we take the saddle out, and I would remove material from the bottom of the saddle. Now in order to do that, we usually do this. We take sticky sandpaper, we put it right on the bench. I'm going to take my saddle and I'm going to move it back and forth a little bit like this, and then I'm going to spin it around 180 degrees and do it again. And I'm going to keep doing that until I take off enough to lower the string height at the 12th fret. Another way that we can judge it is I will take a straight edge like this, and I will put the straight edge right like this, and then I'll take a pencil, and I'll take a sharp pencil, I'll hold the straight edge down, and I'll make a mark, okay? And that mark is going to give me an idea of how much we're going to be taking off. So now, as I'm sanding and spinning it around so I keep the bottom nice and flat, I keep going back to my mark, and I can gauge how much I'm actually taking off the bottom of the saddle. So by adjusting the height of the saddle and how much this saddle pops out of the bridge, I'm able to adjust the heights of the strings at the 12th fret. And the last item of playability is going to be the actual strings themselves, because as the string thickness becomes greater, it's going to take more tension to bring that string up to tune. So if I had a light 6th string, for instance, and I put a tuner on it, and I bring it up to E at 440 hertz, the tension on that string is going to be less than if I had a thicker string. So just by virtue of the fact that we put thicker strings on it is going to make it tougher to push the strings down. So and most people don't realize is as you vary the thickness of your strings, it also changes the intonation of the actual string itself as you go farther up the scale. So if your guitar, if the intonation is set up for, let's say, a light set of strings, and you put a heavier set of strings on or a very light set of strings, the intonation is actually going to change. So it may run into some problems. So the strings have everything to do with playability also. So there's a lot to consider in how you're going to set your guitar up when you're getting ready to design or put together a guitar that you're going to play for a long time. So that ends up being a lot to think about. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to be talking about how the guitar actually produces sound. And we have some factors of sound generation. So we'll be back in a minute. Well, if you're sitting around in a room full of guitarists, one of the subjects that usually pops up is what makes the sound on a guitar. And in reality, it's the strings that are vibrating, transferring the vibration to the top. The top starts to vibrate, and we get sound waves from it, and that's what our ear hears. Now, this is a tuning fork, and you can't hear it. This is the note of B, but if I did this and I put it on the guitar, you can hear the sound that it's making. And what's going on here is that the tuning fork is transferring its vibration to the top, and the top ends up making an audible noise that we can hear. So the point I'm trying to make is that in order for the sound to come out of the guitar, we need to transmit vibrations from the strings to the soundboard efficiently so that we produce the sound that we want. If I change the rate of vibration to an entirely different pitch, now this is A sharp, here's the B, you hear what that sounds like. Now we're going to go to A sharp. Note changed, okay? Lower note. A sharp's lower than B. So as we pick the size strings that we're going to use, the size of the strings end up setting up different vibrations, which in turn are going to give us the different changes in notes. But the big thing is going to be, how do I transmit the sound as best I can to the top? And the way we do that is through the saddle, through the pins, and through the bridge. What we don't see on top of the guitar is on the other side of the soundboard we have what we call a bridge plate. And let me show you one. This is a bridge plate. right in here. And this is a very hard wood. Usually it's made out of maple, could be made out of rosewood. If it's made out of softwood, we have a real problem. And what happens, those ball ends of the strings end up coming through and they're resting against this hard bridge plate. And in turn, it's the ball end of the strings that are going against the bridge plate that helps transmit some of the sound. The rest of the sound is going to come through the actual saddle. So the saddle is going to transmit sound to the top. So if we took our little board and I put it on the saddle, it's going right through and it's energizing the soundboard. We can hear the vibrations as a result of going through the saddle. So in this section, what we're going to be talking about is how do we get the best sound? How do I get the loudest sound? How do I get sound that really is crisp and clear? Well, the first step is to make sure that the material that your saddle is made out of and the material that your nut is made out of is a hard enough material to transmit the sound. The softer something is, the more it absorbs the sound. So if I took this piece of leather, for instance, which is kind of soft, and I put this on it, I can barely hear it. However, if I take my tuning fork and I put it on my bench, you can hear the sound. So as things get softer, they tend to absorb the sound, and they tend to transfer or take away from the ability of the string to transfer its vibration to the top, which is what we want. So the material that our saddle is made out of and the material that our nut is made out of has to be a hard material. Years and years ago, we used to make it out of ivory. Ivory is kind of illegal now. We can't use that. The next best thing is bone, and there are a lot of modern materials that try to approximate bone. The idea is that the bone is very hard, it will transmit the vibration, and in turn it'll get to the soundboard and give us the sound that we're looking for. In order to get to the soundboard, the saddle has to be firmly fitted to the slot. Now, in terms of repairs, we see a lot of guitars that come in where the saddle just sort of slops around. It's very ill-fitting. Well, what happens is, if the saddle does not fit into the slot firmly, it's going to lean. Generally, it's going to be leaning towards the sound hole. And when it does, only part of the bottom of the saddle is going to be touching the bottom of the bridge. It's going to be leaning like this, so a sharp edge is going to be touching rather than the full flatness of the saddle itself. So what happens is we'll be losing some of the sound or some of the ability of it to transmit the vibrations to the soundboard. We also have the problem of the heaviness or the weight of the string. The heavier the string, the lower the vibration is going to be, and the lower the note is going to be. So in terms of producing sound, when I use lighter strings, they tend to be a little bit more on the tinny side or high-pitched. When I use heavier strings, they tend to be on the lower side or lower-pitched. And that's just because they're heavier. For instance, if I tried this little tuning fork on different guitars, I'll get different results from it. So let's take a look and try that. I'm going to apply vibrations from this tuning fork to this guitar here that has a redwood top, this guitar here that has a spruce top, and this banjo, which is more or less like a drum head. So let's see what happens. Not bad, fairly loud. This isn't quite as loud as the redwood top. That's much louder, and what you'll notice is that the banjo resonates. In other words, the vibrations continue. They don't fall off quickly. They don't deteriorate quickly. Listen again to the banjo. You can still hear it resonating after I take the tuning fork off. Whereas if I go to the spruce top, as soon as I take the tuning fork off, it stops. So it just gives you a little bit of an idea that the material that we have on the instrument has everything to do with not only how loud it is, but how long it takes or keeps on resonating after the vibrations die off. And that's part and parcel for any banjo. Banjo just rings out and it has this piercing sound that continues when you play it, whereas the guitar tends to die off quickly. Now, in order to get the vibration of the strings transferred to the saddle, there has to be what we call a break angle. What that means is that the string has to come up, it has to come over the top of the saddle and actually come down on an angle. So as we tighten the strings up, this break angle is pushing downwards on the saddle and pushing it into the slot so it bottoms out. It's quite possible to have a guitar where there's absolutely no break angle. Okay, so here's a picture of a guitar that has a very good break angle. It's sharply bent over the top of the saddle and comes down to the pin. And here's a picture of a guitar that has a very poor break angle. And you can see what happens. There's no downward pressure. Not only would this reduce the amount of sound that comes out of the guitar, but where it hits over the top of the saddle, it is going to vibrate, and we're going to call that a buzz. And we'll get into buzzing in a little while. So the break angle over the top of the saddle becomes very important, as the break angle over the top of the nut. That is important too. It's got to come over the nut and then down. If it doesn't, not only would it vibrate here, but it will reduce the amount of sound that the guitar is going to produce, and it would reduce the amount of resonance, or how long the sound continues after we pluck the string. The sound would stop quicker. And the last thing that we want to talk about is going to be the pins themselves, because most pins, the pins that hold in the end of the guitar string, are made out of just plastic, and they deform over time. And of course there are softer plastics and harder plastics. The best pins are made out of bone. On an old-fashioned guitar they'd be made out of ivory, or they could be made out of wood, a very hard wood like ebony. I tend to like ebony pins myself. I use them quite often. So the harder the pin material, the more vibration is going to be transferred to the top, and consequently we're going to end up getting a fuller and larger sound emanating from the soundboard. So our sound production has to do with everything that transfers the vibration to the top. Once it gets to the top, just like our little tool here, to get to the top is going to end up making a noise, an audible noise that we hear. As we have strings that are different weights, or they're heavier, each one is going to vibrate at a different rate, and that vibration, as it's transmitted to the top, is going to make a different tone. So here I have a D, the note D, and here I have the note A, which is higher. And that's all it is. That's what our guitar is. This top is actually, it's amplifying the vibrations of the strings, and in turn, because the top is flat, the sound waves are being pushed off of the top through the air, and that's what we're hearing. So we'll be back in a minute. All right, now we're going to talk about producing clear notes. And I guess the key word here is buzzing, because most guitarists, their concern is the string is making a buzzing noise. It's driving me crazy. The most common thought is that the string is buzzing against the fret, and that's possible. But the string can also make a buzzing noise at the saddle. The string can also make a buzzing noise at the bridge pin. String can also make a buzzing noise at the nut. And the vibration from the strings can also set up a buzzing noise on the inside of the guitar, for instance, from a loose brace. So there's a lot of factors that produce buzzing in a guitar. We've already talked about the break angle that's over the saddle and the break angle that's over the nut. Both of these conditions can cause a buzzing. If I don't have enough break angle, like for instance this picture of an old Martin 12 string, we're going to have buzzing right at the saddle. It's going to buzz at the saddle, and the amount of sound that the guitar is going to make is going to be greatly reduced. At the same time, if I don't have enough break angle over the nut, again, I'm going to have buzzing right at the nut. So these are two areas that you sort of have to define where the buzzing is coming from. Generally, what we'll do in the shop, if a particular string is buzzing, I'll take a very close look where it goes over the saddle, and if there's no break angle, I'll suspect that's the problem. If there's a break angle, I'll generally look someplace else. We can have a buzzing at the nut by virtue of the fact that there is a very shallow break angle. That's possible. We can also have a buzzing at the nut when the slot of the nut is not cut right. If the string goes too deep into the nut, that ends up being a problem and can cause buzzing. If the slot is too wide, it can cause buzzing. And if the slot slopes down towards the fretboard, it will definitely cause buzzing. So when you make a slot, you have to be very careful with that file, because if you file it too deeply, you file it on the wrong angle. If there's a downward tilt in this direction towards the fretboard, it'll definitely buzz. It'll also change the intonation, so you have to be careful of that. When we pluck the string on a guitar, okay, our thought is that as I pluck the string, the highest part of the vibration, or the arc of the string vibrating, is right in the middle of the string. We pluck the string and we say, yeah, right here in the middle, that's going to be the highest arc. Unfortunately, that's not the case. We didn't pluck the string there. We plucked the string right here. Now, if you could take and measure from where you plucked the string, take that measurement and we measure it over here from the nut, the string is actually going to do one of these things. It's going to go back and forth. Somewhere around the 5th or 6th fret, which is about the distance from the saddle to where you pluck the string, the vibration or arc of the vibrating string is going to be very high at that point. And what we do is we allow the truss rod adjustment to produce some relief, what we call relief. And what that means, if I held down the first string, or the first fret, and I held down, let's say, the 14th fret, somewhere around the 5th and 6th fret, a good setup guitar should have a gap between the bottom of that string and the top of the 5th or 6th fret. That gap doesn't have to be much. It's got to be about maybe 5/1000ths of an inch. 10/1000ths would be kind of high. It's not a great amount of distance, but it has to be there. If I held these two down and there were no gap at all, the neck would not have a little bow in it like this. We would not have any relief. And in the process of not having any relief, when I pluck that string, it's going to hit the string will have a tendency to hit the frets right at that position. So with all the strings on the guitar, I loosen the truss rod just a little bit to allow the neck to bow and have that little bit of relief right around the 5th or 6th fret in order to prevent buzzing. That's what we use the truss rod for. The truss rod also strengthens our neck, but we use the adjustment of the truss rod to set the relief. Everybody thinks that the truss rod is there to adjust the action, and that just isn't true. It's only there to adjust the relief. We set the action, or the height of the action, by adjusting the height of the saddle and by the slots, or the bottom of the slot of the nut. That's how our action's adjusted, assuming that the neck angle of the guitar is correct in the first place. So we're going to use the truss rod to eliminate buzzing by allowing a little bit of relief. When I hold down the 1st fret and the 14th fret, if I go right to the middle, right around the 5th or 6th fret, there should be a little bit of a gap there, maybe 0.005 of an inch, that compensates for this tendency of the string to wobble right here, about the distance where we pluck the string. And that's called relief. It's very important on the guitar. The next thing that we're going to be talking about are going to be the buzzing. Can also come from the actual frets themselves, because the 1 or 2 frets might be too high. So here's the process of checking the frets. We take a tool, usually a 3-sided tool like this, and I'm going to go across 3 frets, and it doesn't rock. And then I'm going to move it up another 3 frets, and it doesn't rock. And I'm going to be moving it up another 3 frets, and it doesn't rock. If one of these frets was high, this would rock. So this is how we check the individual frets to make sure that I don't have a high fret. If I do have a high fret, chances are it's going to buzz on that fret. Okay, so I'm going to take a 4-sided tool, and I'm going to put it across 3 frets. And I'm going to try to make it rock, and it won't rock. And then I'm going to move it up 1 fret. And again, I'm going to try to make it rock, and it doesn't rock. And I'm going to move it up another fret and try to make it rock, and it doesn't rock. So as I come up the fretboard with my tool, the individual frets are going to start to get closer together. So I can use the different sides of this tool to take advantage of that. And so far, I don't have anything that's rocking. I'll go to a shorter one now. No rock, no rock, no rock, no rock. Ah, okay. Little bit of a rock here, but this area here is always suspect, and I'll tell you why. When you attach the neck of the guitar, we set a back angle to this neck. So if I had to take the ruler and this was level with the top of the guitar, there's a little bit of a back angle to the neck, just like this. That's called setting the neck angle. Okay. As we attach the fretboard and we glue it to the top, we have this angle here, and I've exaggerated it quite a bit, but we have this angle here that is going to be taken down because we now clamp this part of the tongue of the fretboard to the top. So the neck angle generally comes up and then comes down like this. This is sort of a downward ramp. So once you got to the whatever fret was at the where the body meets the neck, usually it's going to be the 12th or the 14th fret, depending upon the guitar. Okay, from this point down, it's going to tend to go downhill. So you may experience some rocking there. So you sort of have to check yourself when you get here and you say, okay, listen, it's rocking, and you can hear this rock a little bit. Well, that may very well be this downhill slope giving me that rock. So continue down, and I'm not getting any rocking down in the lower end of it. Chances are it's just that downhill slope that's giving me that one rock right in this position. Not always, okay? When you're checking the rock between 3 sets of frets, you check it in 3 places. For not right at the moment, I'm checking it at the 6th string, then I'm putting it in the middle between the 3rd and 4th string, and now I'm putting it next to the 1st string. So for each set of 3 frets, you check it in 3 places and then move up again. Because it's quite possible that on the heavy side or on the bass side, it'll be perfectly flat all the way across, but you could have a high fret on the other side or in the middle. So we always check it in 3 places and then keep advancing 1 fret at a time. It's time consuming, but that's the only way that you can tell, you know, if I've got a high fret or a portion of the fret is high. What do I do once I find I got a high fret? Well, one thing you can do is that we have a special chisel, and usually it's in our chisel. Oh, here it is. Okay. I have a special chisel. It's made out of brass. This is hollowed out so it matches the contour of the fret itself, and I can lightly tap it, not bang it, but lightly tap it with the back supported. Generally for support, we take a big block of wood like this, we sort of carve it out, and I put some felt on here. This goes on the bench so the back of the neck is supported. So when I tap on it, if the fret came out a little bit, it would go back in and take care of it. If by tapping it, it doesn't get rid of it, then you've got to level and crown the fret. So if it's 1 fret, then we would level it, and then we would put a crown back in it, and we have this special tool that we put sandpaper on. It's got a hollowed point spot. We take the strings off and we go back and forth on it, and we actually recrown the fret and then polish it. Sometimes you can have a whole bunch of frets out, and at that point you've got to recrown and level all of the frets on the fretboard, especially if they're worn. And generally you can salvage an old neck if they're not worn too deeply. You'd be very surprised at some frets that look like they should have been replaced, but we were able to level and crown all of the frets. To do that, we'd have to take the strings off. We'd have to use a leveling block and level all the strings, all the frets. Then we'd have to recrown all the frets and then polish them. In the process of leveling it, the leveling block actually has a built-in radius to it, and we have different radiuses for different fretboards. So as we're leveling it, we are replicating the original radius. So we have tools that we measure the radius with. So what we end up using is a leveling block like this, and this contour of the leveling block matches the radius of the fretboard. With the strings off, we put sandpaper on here, 220 sandpaper. We'd go back and forth, and we would level all of the frets. Once the frets are leveled, now they have a very flat top to them. We have to recrown it, and then we have a special tool like this that we put sandpaper on, and that we go back and forth, and we recrown or put the crown back in the fret. And once we do that, then we recheck it with our little device, our 4-sided measuring device, and if everything is okay, then we put the strings back on it, and we're all set to go. So that's what you have to do in order to fix frets that are giving you a buzzing problem. We're going to start it off by taking a look at a few of the tools that we're going to be used to set up the guitar. And one of the first things we're going to be using is going to be needle nose pliers and a small pair of dikes, a string height gauge, a gauge that is used to check the level of the frets to see if we have any high frets, string winder, these are nut files, a small file if we don't have the nut files, a small rat tail file, flashlight, a mirror. This is just a block, a cushion that what I'm going to put under the neck. You can get them from guitar building suppliers, or guitar repair suppliers, or you can use anything that comes up. It could be a piece of styrofoam. This particular pillow is meant for sewing. A sewer might use it. And we're going to use a block of wood and some 220 sandpaper. And that's about it. That's all we need to do the basic setup on a guitar. Well, we're actually designing this video so people at home can actually set up their guitars. So rather than do it in the workshop, I'm going to do it in the kitchen counter. And one of the first things I did was put a towel down so we don't scratch the guitar. And I put a cushion underneath the neck of the guitar so nothing would happen to the headstock. Now before we take the strings off, the first thing we want to do is check the truss rod. So I'm going to hold down the 1st fret and I'm going to hold down the 14th fret. And I'm going to take a look right here around the 6th fret just to see what the gap is. So as I hold it down, the gap is a little bit too much. It's about 1/10,000th of an inch. So I'm going to be adjusting the truss rod. Well, the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take a look and see the string height off the 12th fret. And to do that, I'm going to take the gauge that I got from Stuart McDonald and I'm going to put it right over the 12th fret. And the height it's showing between the top of the 12th fret and the bottom of the string is about 120 thousandths, which is way too high. We want to get it down to be about 90, somewhere in that area. So in order to do that, we're probably going to have to take some material off the bottom of the saddle. Now there is a height adjustment that's going to be set at the nut. And the easiest way to do it is get yourself a very light guitar pick. I use the ones from Martin. They're about 0.46 millimeters. And that's really a good instrument to measure it with. And all I'm going to do is slide it in here under the 6th string. And what I'm looking for is I want a nice tight fit. If I just press the string down a little bit, it should be about right there, so it just stays in place. But we're a little bit too high, so what I'm going to have to do on all of the strings, I'm going to go through and just check it on all of the strings. All of the strings are a little bit too high, so we're going to actually lower the string height to this measurement at the nut. So now that we've gone ahead and we've checked the truss rod, we've checked the string height at the 1st fret and the string height at the 12th fret, we're going to remove the strings. So I'm going to loosen the tension. Using a little hand winder like this is going to save you a lot of time. When I do it in the shop, I have a winder that's powered by a little electric screwdriver that makes it a lot quicker, but at home this will work fine. We're just going to loosen all the strings so we can get the strings off. We're going to be putting new strings on this at the same time. There's the 5th one and the 6th one. All right, and the next step is going to be taking out the pins. So using the pin removing tool, I'm going to slide it under the pin and just gently pry it up and pull the pin out. Easier said than done. Okay. And as I'm pulling the pin out, I want to look in here to make sure that it's not distorted. Most pins are going to be plastic, and if they're distorted, it's a good idea to get rid of them, put a new set of pins in. If you can get ebony pins, they're the best, in my estimation. Some people will put bone pins in. Some people will put pins in that are made out of a hard man-made material. And some people will put pins in the old days that were made out of ivory. They're very brittle. So we're going to pull the strings out. And at the same time, we're going to pull the saddle out. I'm going to look in here to make sure that there are no shims under there, so I've got the saddle ready to trim down. Once we get the strings off, now's the time to take a good look at all the frets and see if we have any wear. This particular guitar is just about brand new. So we don't have any wear at all. But at the same time, I'm going to take my height device and I'm going to put it across 3 frets and make sure it doesn't rock. And I'm going to check it at 3 points. And then I'll come up a fret. And again, make sure it doesn't rock. And again, come up a fret. Check it in 3 places, make sure it doesn't rock. We're going to do this over the entire fretboard and make sure there are no high frets. As we get to the far end, we can use the shorter end of the tool to span the 3 frets. But this one is going to be pretty good. And one of the things that you have to worry about with a guitar is to make sure the nuts are tight. And this is a new guitar, they're tight, but quite often you're going to find these nuts loose. You want to tighten them before you go any farther. Just check each one of the tuners, make sure they're solid, and turn each one of the tuners. Make sure that the tuners turn freely. There's no place where they bind up, and that they move easily. And so we're all set to go. As we learned earlier in the video, we want to make sure that our bridge plate is in good shape. So I'm going to take a mirror. I'm just going to take a mirror, look down there, and make sure that the bridge plate on this guitar is in good shape. And it is. It looks solid. There's no indication that the knobs on the end of the string were being pulled into the wood. So this is in good shape. We don't have to worry about it. Now, one of the things I wanted to do is remove material from the bottom of the saddle. I'm going to put a straight edge over it, and I'm going to make a pencil line about a little bit more than the width of the pencil lead. We only need to take about 30 thousandths off this. Once I make the pencil line, I'm going to take the piece of wood with 220 sandpaper on it and start going back and forth, removing material from the saddle. Now in some cases we'll have to make shims to raise the saddle. It really depends on the setup of the guitar. Quite often we'll see the saddle way too low. I generally make shims out of wood toothpicks that I buy in the store. So I'm only going to go a little bit on each side and keep turning it. That way, what I'm trying to do is keep this area square. So if I keep alternating it back and forth, I have a good shot at keeping it square. What we don't want to have happen is we don't want it to be on an angle. Then our contact at the bottom of the bridge would be way off. So I'm getting there little by little. Just keep sanding it away until you get close to that pencil line, which we're doing. And you can see the mess that we're making. I'm going to check and see if it's square. And it still seems square to me. Good. Almost to that pencil line. I've taken about 20 thousandths off right now. And I'm going to keep sanding away. What I want to end up with is I want it to be square on the bottom, and I want to see just a little bit of that pencil line. And I'm almost there. A little bit more. Good. That should about do it. Then, rub it on a little bit of angle, break off any burrs that might be there, and it's ready to stick in the slot, and we're going to take a look at it. So I'm going to take it, slide it into the slot, and as I'm putting it in, I want to make sure that it doesn't wobble back and forth. If this wobbled back and forth like this, we'd have a definite problem with the bridge. And we want to, probably at this point, you'd want to bring it to a luthier and have him put a new bridge on it. Or an oversized saddle. But this is nice and firm. It's not wobbling back and forth. It's definitely a little bit lower, and that should be okay for now. Now, using the fret files, I'm going to file a little bit off each slot on the fret, but notice I'm on an angle. I don't want it to be flat, and I definitely don't want it to be down like this. So I'm not taking off a lot. I'm just going to removing some to drop it down at the first fret. Each fret file can do 2 slots. They're 2 different sizes. So we're going down, and there we are. We're not taking off a lot. All right, the last 2 are going to be here. And here. And again, I'm on an angle. What I don't want to do is file it so it's down on an angle like this. It would definitely buzz. All right, so we should be in pretty good shape at this point. Once I get it done, before I put the strings in, I'm going to take a pencil and I'm going to take the lead from the pencil and fill up the slots. Just get some graphite in there. And this is going to lubricate it. All right, that should be good. Okie dokie. All right, just before we put the strings on, I'm just going to double check the neck angle, and I'm going to put a ruler on the frets, hold them against the frets, slide it over, and I want that ruler just to be even, just about with the top of the bridge. So if the alignment of the frets are just even with the top of the bridge like this, that means that the string height is going to be set by the saddle. If this was dropped down like this, that means either the soundboard has lifted up, the bridge is twisted, or the neck angle is incorrect and it has moved forward. In either case, it involves a lot of work at a luthier shop. We're looking for the straight edge to be just even with the top of the bridge. That would mean that the string height is completely adjusted by the height of the saddle, and nothing else is making a difference in the string height. And it's time to put the strings in. So we're going to take our first string, this is our first string, and I'm going to take my needle nose pliers and just make a little bit of a kink in it. And I'm going to put that kink facing forward, or facing the headstock, line up the slot with a string, push it down, and gently push it in. Now, I should be able to pull this up so the ball hits the bridge plate, and then gently push this in. That's all we need to do. I should be able to pull this out with my fingers if I want. And at this point, we can go ahead and attach the other end of the string. So we're going to take a look. We'll do that one more time. I'm going to take and make a little bit of a kink. Take that kink, face the kink that way towards the headstock, line up the slot in the pin, push it down most of the way, pull it up so the ball hits the bridge plate, and take my finger and push it in like this. If you think you have to take a hammer and hit it in, or take something heavy and push it in, something's wrong. It has to go in finger tight. So then on the other end, we'll take the string. I usually bring it back past the point at which it's going to go, the distance of the next pin. So I'm going to cut it off here. And a lot of people will argue this point. They'll do fancy knots. I never do a fancy knot. I've been doing this for 20 years. I just put it in there, hold it in place, start to wind it. As I'm winding it, I gave it a quick kink,
and tighten the string up. There we are. Okay. Now it's too early to judge anything on this guitar because we don't have all the strings on. We have to get all the strings on the guitar before we can assess whether or not our string heights are okay. So this is the peg I'm going to put it on. I'm going to cut it off about right there. I'm just going to put it in the hole. I'm going to use my winder. Give it a quick kink. And again, in the shop, I use an electric winder. It's a lot easier, but this works. Okay, good. So I'm going to go ahead and put all the strings on. Okay, now we've got all the strings on and it's tuned the pitch. And we're going to check the spacing at the first fret. And as I slide my 0.46 millimeter pick in there, there's a nice drag on it, and that's all I want. Same thing for the next one. Same thing for the next one. Pull it out, we'll check on the other side. Slight drag, we're doing good. So we were able to drop this height to the right amount. And at the same time, we lubricated the slots in the nut for the strings so they won't squeak when we start to tighten them up. I did tweak the truss rod a little bit, so if I press down the first fret and I press down the 14th fret, and I have just enough space under the 6th fret to give me a little bit of relief. If it buzzed at all, I could always back off the truss rod just a little bit to control the relief. That's what the truss rod is for. And the last thing I'm going to check is I'm going to check to make sure there's a break angle for each string over the saddle. If I didn't have this break angle or downward slope, we'd have a problem. It would probably buzz there. But we have a break angle over each part of the saddle. So this guitar should be all set to go.